So I want to take a moment today, and I want to just talk about the fact that as Christians, something we don't do really well, sometimes that, and we'll talk about this even today, and I don't know how long this will be. I don't have slides today. I want us to just be in the moment here. So if you have a Bible, if you have a phone with a Bible on it, we'll only be looking at two passages today, John 11 and Lamentations chapter 3. So there will only be two today. It's one of the reasons I didn't feel we needed to have that. And also because I felt God was telling us to come together, to take a moment to reflect. And one of the things we don't do well, we theologize away, is pain, is suffering, is mourning. And today, even here in our congregation, there are those that are hurting badly. And so today, I felt God was asking us to pause from all of our series and our thought processes and take a moment to lament. For those of you who don't know, someone who is very precious to us, to many of us in here, died this past week. Her name is Christine. She's a mother, a friend, and someone who is deeply missed. I think about today, even Malachi. Today is a day of lament. What do we do with these things? How do we process them? How do we walk through it? I'm telling you, I'm not an expert. I haven't always done it well. I do think God gives us some guidance. And I do think that Jesus is the answer. And so whatever question, whatever hurt, whatever pain you may be going through, and all of us are going through it. I mean, there's a fairly famous song, right? Everybody hurts, and it's not a lie. And we'll get into that. But what do we do with these things, and how do we deal with them? And most of us, we don't deal with it so well. But today I want to read out of John chapter 11 and just talk about four characters in this story, and that makes it sound like a novel. I want to talk about four people in this account, this historical account. I want to talk about Jesus and what we can learn from Jesus. I want to talk about Martha, what we can learn from Martha. I want to talk about Mary, what we can learn from Mary, and I want to talk about Lazarus and what we can learn from Lazarus. As we think about loss and we think about grief and we think about hurt, what are some of the things that we can learn from? As a congregation, as individuals. And I'm going to start today in verse 18. This is why you should write these things down. We're going to start in verse 17. How about that? John 11, verse 17. It says, "So when Jesus came, he found that he had been in the tomb 4 days." So Jesus is coming, all right, to do something miraculous. And when Lazarus, who is his friend, who is the brother of Mary and Martha, who we'll see in this story, has passed away, kind of an undisclosed way. We don't know exactly what it was all about. But he's passed away, and he now has been dead for 4 days. And Jesus comes to the place where he is, and he has told his disciples, for the glory of God, and he's come for a purpose. And so this is where we enter the story. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 15 stadia away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. This is important because I want us to just take a moment and recognize that the Bible does give us guidelines. It says that when we have those among us who suffer hurt and loss, we actually should do this. We should pause. We shouldn't just put our head down and grind away at the sermon series that we know God told. No, it's time right now for us as a congregation to stop, to mourn with those who mourn, to comfort those who need comforting, and to take a moment to do that. So then Martha, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha then said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise from the dead. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live, even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, and he who comes into the world. When she had said this, she left and called Mary, her sister, saying, secretly, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard this, she got up quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and were consoling her, when they saw that Mary had gotten up quickly and left, they followed her, thinking that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So when Mary came to the place where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews were saying, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could this man who opened the eyes of the blind, of those who was blind, not have also kept the man from dying? So Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. And Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, but I knew that you always hear me. Nevertheless, because of the people standing around, I said it so that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And out came the man who died, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Amen. Today, my purpose that I believe God has asked me today is not to, exegete this passage and explain every piece of it, but rather from more of a prophetic space. And that's what I'm saying today, is that I'm not making conclusions that I want you to walk out and tell everybody is what is. I'm telling you that this is God comforting us. This is God asking us to see his word as living and active and able to speak into our very situations. And in this passage, for each one of these characters not named Jesus, Jesus is the answer. And brothers and sisters, for each of us today, in whatever situation we find ourselves in, Jesus is the answer. I want to start with Lazarus. I know he's the end of this story, but I do want to start there because I want to make sure that we acknowledge something that's very important today. For Lazarus, yes, there is no answer from anything or anywhere. He can't move, he can't seek, he can't breathe. The only answer, the only hope that he has is Jesus. Because, brothers and sisters, what we can learn from Lazarus and what we can learn about Jesus in this, and it's very important today for us to understand that, because it frames the way that we walk with others through grief and mourning and how we deal with our own loss. And that is this, that for Lazarus, even though he had been dead 4 days, there was not a single human thing that could be done for him. There was no human being who had authority over him. There was no human being that could change his resting location. There was no human being that could do anything. The only person who had authority in Lazarus' body, in his life, and in his death was Jesus Christ. And it's important for us to understand this because the Bible tells us, right, that Jesus Christ died by crucifixion, that he was buried, and that he was raised to life again. And when that happens, when he does that, he pays the price and the penalty for sin, and he buys back his people so that he has authority. Jesus is the only one who has authority to give life, and he is the only one who has authority in our death. What does this mean? It means that no matter how we die, no matter where we die, no matter when we die, the only being, the only person, the only one who has any authority over where we go or what happens to us is Jesus. It's not dictated by our choices. It's not dictated by someone else's choices. It's not dictated by your theology or what you think should happen. It is only dictated by Jesus Christ himself. And if we look at this passage, it says so clearly, they looked at what Jesus was right there in that moment, and they said, look how much he loved him. Brothers and sisters, I don't know what happens exactly when we die. And I cannot and will not try to determine what happened to somebody, except for this. When someone takes their last breath on this earth, what I know for sure is that they are placed into the hands of the only one that has authority, and that is Jesus Christ, the one who loves them. Today, Christine is in his hands, and he is good. And he loves her. The only hope for any of us, brothers and sisters, beyond this life is Jesus. Because he is the only one who has authority to determine what happens to us. Because this life is not the end, it's just the beginning. And that is a hope that we hold. In fact, it's the hope that Martha goes right to. But before I get to Martha, I want to have a little bit of a discussion around all of these things we just talked about and the things that I've said before. Brothers and sisters, when someone dies, it hurts. It's hard to process. It's hard to do something with because, and I've said this before, in our created order, we weren't made to die. But because sin came into the world, death has now become a part of this life. And so we have no way to really, do you understand this? There's just no human answer to death. Can I explain this? Because we weren't created to die. We were put, you got to hear me today. We were put in the garden to live a life fulfilling God's purposes and bringing him glory. And so we have everything within us by God's grace to do that, but we do not have the ability within us to deal with death. We weren't created to be able to deal with it. In the same way, we have no way within us. We know this theologically. We know this biblically. There is no human answer for death, and there is no human answer for sin because we were not created with that in mind. So the answer for death because you get me, to help me know this, right? Has anybody figured out how to make people live or how to make them back alive once they're dead? No. It ain't coming, just so you know. There's no human answer. And there's no human solution for sin. Because God didn't create us for that. It's not in us. And so we know in order for us to deal with sin, in order for us to deal with death, we need something outside of us. And Jesus is the answer. By his death, he paid for the sins that we could not, and by his resurrection, he took authority over death. But sin, has its ultimate ending, always results in death, but it's not always physical death. It's not always our last breath. You see, the reality is that sin has this devious effect on us that leaves us wounded. And oftentimes, it's the sin that has been done through others that leaves us hurt. Someone does something that they really should not have done, and it leaves us wounded. They say something, do something, and we're hurt. Sometimes it's not anything anybody says or does at all. It's just the product of living in a world that is sinful and fallen, and things don't work out, and we feel hurt. Sometimes it's its ultimate result, and somebody dies, and we feel pain. Sometimes it's the things we've done. And we feel shame and guilt, and that is hurt. We're hurting. And brothers and sisters, just as there's no human solution for sin and there's no human solution for death, there is no human solution for pain, for hurt. Because once again, hear me, we weren't created for it. We weren't created to process it, because that wasn't God's intention for his people. And so just like we need a solution outside of ourselves for sin and for death, brothers and sisters, we need a solution outside of ourselves for pain and for hurt. We're not designed for it. But we know it's why it hurts so bad. It's why it feels so wrong. It's why we try to get rid of it. We know it's not supposed to be here. And we even intuitively know that we don't have an answer for it. So we try to get rid of it sometimes through anger, right? We get rid of it for a moment, but then it's back. We try to get rid of it by bringing something in, maybe a substance or some right thoughts, or do you understand? We realize that it's not supposed to be there, and it doesn't feel right. And we know we can't. That's why you feel so helpless so quickly. Interestingly enough, brothers and sisters, tomorrow is what they call Blue Monday. The day of the year in the UK that they say is the most depressing day of the year. For many of the same factors that those of us who live in British Columbia also experience. And sometimes we feel sad, and we don't even know why. So that brings us to Martha. Now, Martha is an interesting case because as soon as she knows that Jesus is coming, she comes there. And I'm going to kind of label Martha today the theological thinker. All right? And she comes to meet Jesus, and she does something that a lot of us do in these moments of hurt and pain. She goes to meet Jesus because her theology points her to Jesus, which is why it's important, right? I'm going to tell you something about theology today. Theology is just how we understand and know God, right? That's why you can have poor theology, even though we have a good God. But Martha comes out to Jesus, and Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, we're going to see this same statement from Mary, but I think it comes from a very different place. And today, I have to, on a certain level, speculate, but I'm going to say that this is possible and that this is something we see often. Martha's not so much angry as she's processing the questions we all process. Why? Why, God? Why? Why didn't you do something? Why is my brother dead? Why do I feel this way? Why did this person do this to me? Why? And she expresses a sentiment that we've often said ourselves, I'm sure, where were you? But she follows it with pretty good theology. But it's okay, God, even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. I wanted you to see that she's starting to kind of express how she feels, but she shuts it down. Because she knows better. She knows better. Just hear what I'm saying. How often do we feel a certain way, but we know better? Like we shouldn't feel this way, and we just shut that thing down. And I have no doubt these are the things that people have been saying to her. And I want you to really pay attention that Jesus doesn't actually answer her question. He does in a way, and I'll get that in a second. But Jesus said to her, your brother will rise from the dead. And let me just say this once again. We see her detachment from the moment. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Listen to her great theology. Yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, and he who comes into the world. So you're at this point in this passage, and you're like, she gets it. She understands it. She knows what's about to go down, right? But what I want you to see in this is what I believe Jesus is doing. First of all, he doesn't answer where he was. He answers where he is. Did you hear what I said? He doesn't answer her where he was. He doesn't answer her why it happened. Because to be quite frank, those aren't the things that are going to help her. See, what we think and what we know, it's important, but who we know is more important. She giving him theological responses, and he's giving her a covenantal response. He's saying, I am with you. And her responses are all, listen, her responses are all what will be. Man, can I get an amen from somebody who lives this way? Because I do it way too often. I'm feeling something. So listen, some of us go into the theological thinking. Some of us just put it in the jar and put it on the shelf. You know what I'm talking about? Nope, not going to deal with that. I'm not going to process that. This is how my mind is dealing with the hurt, with the pain, with the rejection. I'm going to get rid of it. I have to get rid of it. So I'm just going to put it up there and try to forget about it. But it keeps building up and building up and building up and building up and building, and then and then some of us, we keep trying to theologize ourselves into this place of comfort. And so we just keep saying these things that are true, but somehow our emotional reality is detached from it. Somehow we think that it's not wise, or it's not very Christian, or it's not right to tell God how I feel, because I shouldn't feel this way. I should do better. And I believe that Jesus in this time, what he's doing is he's encouraging Martha to stay in the moment with him. He's actually giving her permission to let go. None of this is untrue, but she kept saying, it's coming, God, and I know the resurrection is coming, and then everything will be okay, and it's going to be all right, God. I just have to keep going, and someday down the road, then there's going to be resurrection, and someday down the road, then I'll understand my pain, and someday down the road, I can figure this out, and someday down the road, I'll be whole, and someday I will be, and Jesus says, I am. He doesn't say, I will be the resurrection. He doesn't say, I will be the answer. He doesn't say that I will be your healer. He says, I am. I am that person. I am with you right now, and I am. Right now in this place, I am the resurrection and the life. And so today, I want to tell us, Pastor Littlejohn has been talking to me about this for a couple of years now. processing our feelings, acknowledging how we feel. Because some of us don't do that well. So Pastor Littlejohn, I think you would say that before. You didn't do that very well, and somebody's helping. He's really come to this understanding of how to process these things before God. I'm super emotional. But the truth is I'm not emotional with God. I'm theological with God. And I started to realize this week that, no, Jesus is encouraging me. He's encouraging you. He's encouraging you, Trevor and Kingston. Just stay here. It's okay to cry. I'm with you. Tell me how you feel. And I found myself saying, God, I feel sad. I'm not going to try to theologize it away or shame myself essentially through my theology to stop feeling it. I'm going to acknowledge that I feel it and that I have no way to get rid of it on my own, and I need you. And that's what he's doing with Martha. And you go, oh, I don't know, maybe you're reading too much into it, but let's go to the end of this passage really quickly. After all that he said to her, after he says, I am the I am, I'm right here, right? This is where I am. He says, remove the stone. And Martha, rational Martha, says, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. After everything that Jesus just said, and after her response that, yes, you are the Messiah, the Son of God, you can do whatever you want, brothers and sisters, there's a disconnect between her theology and her reality. Why is Jesus the healer for everyone but you? Why is Jesus a miracle worker in everyone's life but yours? Why is Jesus? Jesus is for you what he is for all. The I am, the Savior, the Messiah, the resurrection, and the life. But even after all of that, her response is, no, hold on a second. You know it's going to smell, right? And Jesus says, after all that we've been through, not just this, but he has a relationship with Martha. Are you telling me? Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Jesus teaches us, even as those who mourn with others who mourn. You know what? Theology points us in the right direction, and it did a good job of pointing Martha towards Jesus, but it is not the answer. My hope isn't that Jesus is, that my hope is not in the resurrection. My hope is not in heaven. My hope is not in the things that I know. The hope is in who I know. Because without Jesus, none of those things are possible. Paul says that if Jesus was not raised to life, we of all people are to be the most pitied. See, our theology will point us towards Jesus, but the only answer for our pain, our suffering, our mourning is Jesus himself. And maybe we need to stop trying to theologize everyone into comfort, but rather use what we know of God to point them to Jesus and be bold enough to say, I can't help you. But what I can do is I can be with you, and I can encourage you to stay with Jesus in this moment and tell him how you're really feeling and allowing the I am to minister to the thing that you don't have the ability to get rid of yourself. So let's turn to Mary for a second. See, Mary is also like me. Because when Jesus comes, and Mary is, listen, we know Mary's emotional. We know this because this is the woman who poured her heart out. Right? Poured her heart out to Jesus. We know she's emotional. And it's really telling in this passage that unlike Martha, whose theology points her towards a meeting with Jesus, even though her theology doesn't get her through her pain, Mary stays home. It's very interesting, though, that despite, and I'm going to tell you that as I read this passage now, I see that she's a little bit angry and upset. And some of her anger and upsettedness is pointed towards Jesus. And because he's Jesus, he knows that. But even if he wasn't Jesus, the very fact that she didn't come and Martha did would have told him that. And what's very interesting about this, and I want everyone to hear this, even though Mary is angry with Jesus, he sends Martha to get her. I want you to hear this today. Jesus is not pushing Mary away because she too has poor theology. He's actually saying, bring your anger here. Bring your frustration here. Bring your sadness here. Bring it to me. So it says, right? Mary went to her sister secretly and said, the teacher is here and is calling for you. It's interesting because I think it's that breaks her out of it a little bit, because she knows deep down inside, I would think that she can't be angry with him, but he asks her to come, and so she does. It says that she gets up, and then in verse 31, then the Jews who were with her in the house and were consoling her, when they saw that Mary had gotten up, quickly left, and they followed her, thinking that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So when Mary came to the place where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. There is not another thing right here that she says. I don't know if you've ever been in this place where you've been feeling hurt and pain, and so what comes out of you is this vitriol, this anger. And when you finally get to say it out loud, it feels better. You relieve that pressure for a moment, because you got to shout it out, you got to punch it out. Before I knew Jesus, that was my way. Hit the wall, literally. But this picture of Mary teaches us so clearly once again that there's no human solution to this suffering. Because she lets it out and has this moment of relief of saying, how could you? And then returns right back to weeping. See, brothers and sisters, there's not one of us in here. It's important for us to understand this today, because it is only in understanding this and accepting this that we can actually be humble towards one another. But there's not a single one of us in here who hasn't tried to process our pain with a human solution. So how dare we judge how someone else tried to process their pain? We can't. And the funny thing about it is, some of us will process it with something as simple as food. Oh, this is my reward. I'm going to feel good. You know what really makes me feel good? Like if you gave me a whole red velvet cake, the entire time I was eating it, I would be so happy. 30 minutes later, I would hate it. But eating is an actual really good example of what I'm saying. Because when we eat, right, and when we eat and we eat and we eat, we start to gain weight. Right? We take this thing on, and instead of thinking maybe we should stop, we just keep going. And before you know it, we're very unhealthy, and it's very hard for us to move. But you can take food, or you can take shopping, pornography, sex, cigarettes, alcohol. Anger. how many hurt people. And the more you do it, the more reliant you become on it, and the more you become less and less able to find the true solution. But today, this is not the day to judge those choices. It is the day to acknowledge that those choices will not make us whole. And so Jesus, what does Jesus say to Mary to comfort her? It says, therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, he told her a lot of stuff that would make her feel better. That's not what it says. The Jews who came with her also weeping. He was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. I want you to know today that Jesus is mourning too. Why does Jesus cry? Is he not understanding what he's going to do, 30 minutes later? I don't know how many minutes it is, right? No. He is acknowledging the hurt and the pain around him. And so with Martha, right, he says to her, hey, stay in this moment with me. And with Mary, I'm not advocating we stay up all in our feelings, because we start making decisions out of our feelings, we're in big trouble. What I am telling us is that there is someone who has the answer to those feelings. And that someone is Jesus. And what Jesus does with Mary is he doesn't tell her to stop. Stop crying. Or as my dad used to say, stop being such a big baby. Stop being such a girl. Stop it. Because that didn't help me just stuff things in the back. Still talking about today, Dad, so good job. So with Martha, Jesus says, hey, stay in the moment here with this. Stay in the moment with me. I am here. Don't rationalize it away. Don't pack it away. And with Mary, he just stays in the moment with her. He weeps with those who weep. And I want you to know that today, God is not asking you to stop feeling. He wants to join with you where you're hurting. Because he loves us. That's really what it all comes down to. He didn't ask sin into this world, we did. But he has an answer for all of its consequences. And that answer is not however many miles and years away when he returns. That answer is now. Does that mean everything will be fixed and put together? No, it doesn't. But it means that Jesus is the safest person, the safest counselor. The Bible tells us, Jesus says, I will leave my comforter, the Holy Spirit, for you. He uses that word because he says, in this world you will have trouble. I can't spare you from that, but what I can give you, my everlasting covenant, is the Spirit of the living God to comfort you in your places. And do you know how often, I'm saying this as my own personal thing, I theologize and rationalize and humanly deal with my pain. And do you know how unhealthy that makes me? I was fortunate enough to have God convict me of this week, and so I actually got to practice this. Even with my son last night, we did it together. And I had to stop myself from, being upset with the way that I feel. and like shaming myself into not having better faith. Because Jesus encourages Martha to faith, but he does it by bringing her to him. And so I had to admit to God that I was sad and I was hurting and I didn't know what to do with it. I'm better today because of that. Not 100%. Because I believe this is a lifelong process where I have to become humble enough to allow myself to be that broken child who needs his daddy. I want to end today by going to Lamentations, and I'm hoping this will help us. Lamentations is written by Jeremiah. Jeremiah is like my spirit animal, the weeping prophet. In chapter 3, he's both pouring out his own pain and the pain of a people. But in verse 17, and I want us to step into this place today, because if one of the most impactful prophets in the history of God's people can lament, so can we. And I want us to take a moment wherever we are today, and I don't know if it's shame from the things you've done, grief from the things that have happened. I don't know if it's what sin's been done to you or what sins you have committed. I don't know if it's just, listen, I have I understand seasonal affective disorder. I didn't even know that. It's a result of sin. So the happy light helps, but it isn't my answer. Today in this place, what hurts in your life are causing you, and this is very important, causing you to engage in behaviors that medicate your hurt and don't heal it? What are you engaging in right now that is not a healthy way to deal with your rejection, your disappointment, your pain, your grief? Not in a space of condemnation, but a space of acknowledgement. Can we acknowledge it? Can you do that today? Yeah, there are some things. Yep. And I do this because, yep. And then there are some things we've done so long that we don't even have control over, and I want us to acknowledge those too. And then I want to see this right here, because this is what happens over time when we don't process these things with Jesus. In verse 17, it says, "My soul has been excluded from peace. I have forgotten happiness." I'm not asking you guys to say this, but I know that I could put myself right in this passage. Not right at this very moment, but I have been here. Maybe some of us are there right now. My soul has been excluded from peace. My soul, my inner person. I have forgotten happiness. Wow. So true. So verse 18 says, "So I say, my strength has failed, and so has my hope from the Lord." There's an anger here, a frustration. I don't feel happy, and my soul is not at peace. And God, where are you? And then verse 19, it says, "Remember my misery and my homelessness, the wormwood and the bitterness." It's interesting because wormwood would really be associated with this results of idolatry, whereas bitterness is like you ate a bitter soup, didn't know it. It's like all of the things that are encapsulated with what sin does to us when we do it and we feel this. He's saying, I feel pain that's been inflicted on me. I feel pain from the choices that I've made. I feel regret. I feel bitterness and anger. I'm miserable. And this is what he says here in verse 20. He says, my soul certainly remembers and is bent over within me. I want you to just take a moment. It says that Jesus was moved deeply, gutturally. And so when we hear these words, my soul remembers these things, and it's bent over in me. That's despair. That's where Mary was, where Martha was, where all the people around them were, and that's where Jesus met them. Today, know this is where he meets us. He says, I recall this to mind. And this is important to me. When he says, I recall this to mind, he's telling you that these aren't just things present. It's like, you ever, because if you're like me and you do the stuffing thing and the rationalizing thing, it's like you can really go sometimes a month, 2 months, 3 months, 3 years. But then it comes back. And the feelings are all still there. And you begin to realize it still is driving so many of your choices. Can I say this? Unaddressed pain, unaddressed hurt. And I should say this unaddressed by the Spirit of the living God. Always will try to be expelled or exterminated by your being. It doesn't just go away. But he says, I recall this to mind, and this is where theology points him towards God. It's important. What we know is important, yes. Who we know is more important. So he turns, he says, therefore I wait. Why does he wait? And what does that mean? We'll get to that for a second, but he says this, the Lord's acts of mercy indeed do not end, for his compassions do not fail. All right, that's truth. Doesn't say he feels any better. It just means that in the midst of how he's feeling, he's reminding himself of who God is. This is good theology. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I wait for him. I want you to understand this very clearly. I believe I'm seeing this so clearly. He's saying these things. He knows they're true, but that hasn't changed how he feels. What he's doing is in the midst of it, reminding himself of the truth, orienting himself towards God. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I wait for him. The Lord is good to those who await him, to the person who seeks him. This is it right here. It is good that he waits silently for the salvation of the Lord. And I saw this time, and I was looking at that word silently. And most of the time it's silent. But there's these connotations, two of them. One is this posture of humbling. I should talk about more of them, actually, because it's really interesting to me. It's the posture of a rock. It doesn't move. It has no way of moving. But at the heart of all of this, it says, to be pricked in the heart. And I'm like, this is it. This is what I do. This is where my pain goes. My theology points me to Jesus, and then I don't deny how I'm feeling. I sit there like a rock, pricked in the heart, and I await the I am. I don't try to do something else to take the pain away. I don't run to something or someone. I sit and I say, God, I know who you are, but I need you to be I am. Where I am right now, God, would you join me in silence? And that is our humility saying, Jesus, I need you. My solutions are insufficient. Would you comfort me?